Coming up on Locked On Dodgers, the Hall of Fame inducted one player, Scott Rolen. We'll talk about him. We'll talk about other people that could have got in but didn't get in. And then we'll look at the 2024 ballot and see who's out there and who might make the Hall of Fame next year. And we'll also talk about Max Muncy and what his role is going to be for the Dodgers this year. That's what's on tap, so make sure to keep it Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yo, Dodger fans. Welcome to Locked On Dodgers. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 local sports daily podcast network. Locked On, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. This is the daily podcast covering the Los Angeles Dodgers, bringing you the smart fans' perspective on our boys in blue. We can be found wherever you find podcasts and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. And if you never want to miss a day, because you know we're not going to, you can always subscribe and get it sent directly to your notifications, and you'll never miss. So that's what you need to do. If this is your first time listening or watching, I'm Samperio, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Jeff Snider. Jeff and I are both lifelong Dodger fans that have spent time covering the team, currently cover the team, have spent time in the press box, locker room, and all over Dodger Stadium and all over the country following the Dodgers. So we aren't quite insiders. We aren't quite, the big shots like Ken Rosenthal and all those guys. But we're here to bring you the smart fans perspective on our boys in blue, which is not something Ken Rosenthal can bring you. So that's why we're here to talk Dodgers. Not too much Dodger talk in terms of today and in terms of news, no real news and directly involving the Dodgers. But yeah, Jeff, good to be back with you.
Yeah, I appreciate you holding it down the last couple of days. I have been sick as a dog, and I'm feeling better enough to do this podcast with you tonight anyway, and then hopefully go get some sleep because it's been bad. But I will say you and I are both bigger than Ken Rosenthal, and that is something for sure. And there was some Dodgers news on Tuesday, a slew of minor league signings, but definitely Hall of Fame is the bigger news today.
Yeah, the Hall of Fame announced the inductees for the 2023 class, and it's just one inductee, Scott Rolen. He gets in. I remember we talked about it last year, and you had the argument for why Scott Rolen is a Hall of Famer, so I'm sure we'll let you speak about that again. Just some other notables with Dodger ties. Andre Ethier will not be on the ballot next year. He didn't receive any votes. Kind of what we talked about last year also, is we didn't think there was anything there for him. Gary Sheffield, closer but not quite there, and then you have guys not necessarily Dodger related, Todd Helton and Billy Wagner, who are close, who might get in eventually, and then another one that was getting close but not quite there as well as Andruw Jones, who has Dodger ties but not necessarily positive Dodger ties, which might be one of the reasons why he's not in yet.
Let's start with Scott Rolen, just because he's for me, he was a no-brainer, like an easy choice for the Hall of Fame. And I recognize that not everybody feels that way. I've seen a lot of people talking about how it devalues the Hall of Fame. He's the worst player in the Hall of Fame, blah, 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 blah. Scott Rolen was a very good hitter. And what gets him in addition to being a very good hitter, he was also one of the top 3 or 4 best defensive third basemen in history. And that's a combination that is, there's not enough third basemen in the Hall of Fame anyway. It's an underrepresented position. And Rolen is like probably the 8th best third baseman in baseball history. Like you really got to get to the cream of the crop of Mike Schmidt and George Brett and those guys to be better than him. And so for me, Rolen, what he did offensively, he had a 122 career OPS plus, which is almost exactly the same as Jeff Kent's. And we're going to talk about Jeff Kent and his case. Imagine Jeff Kent's offense, but also being literally among the very, very best at his position in his career defensively. That's Scott Rolen. And so for me, Scott Rolen was such an easy choice, and it was frustrating to me that it took as long as it did. And it wasn't looking like he was going to get in this year. It looked like, when you look at Ryan Thibodeau's tracker, his vote tracker, it looked like based on historical precedent. He was above the line, but usually those guys drop below, and that's what happened with Todd Helton. But enough of the people who don't submit their ballots to Thibodeau did put Rolen on their list that he made it in. For me, well deserved. He was, you know, one of the arguments against him is he never won an MVP, never even finished super high. I think he topped out at finishing fourth one time in the MVP voting. A lot of that is because he struggled with injuries throughout his career. And so he very rarely played a full season. He only had 600 plate appearances in a season 5 times, but he had 500 plate appearances in a season another 5 times, and 400 another 3 times. He played enough for sure in his 17 seasons to add up the total value, and it's hard to judge a guy for not winning MVPs just because he didn't play enough in any given season when overall his body of work was, wow, that dude's easy Hall of Famer.
Yeah, the one year he did finish fourth in MVP, he was behind Barry Bonds, Adrian Beltre, and Albert Pujols. So, it's not necessarily, those years were tough to. You look at Albert Pujols' numbers that year and you think, oh, yeah, that's an MVP year, and not quite there. You look at Adrian Beltre's MVP numbers that year and you think MVP. And then you look at Barry Bonds and you're like, oh, that's why they didn't win MVP that year. But yeah, Scott Rolen, I never have much thought about it in terms of when you just hear Scott Rolen, I don't think Hall of Fame right away, but when you do look at it, there's 7-time All-Star, 8-time Gold Glove. He, career 855 OPS. He very, like you mentioned, very one of the best defensively. I can see it, and I don't have a big issue with it. The Hall of Fame is celebrating some of the best that played baseball, and just because Scott Rolen wasn't the best at the time he was playing doesn't mean he's not one of the best. So
yeah. Then there's Andruw Jones, who the case for Jones is similar to the case for Rolen. He was a solid hitter and a very good defender. The 2 questions are, one, he was a worse hitter than Rolen. He had a 111 career OPS plus. And a lot of that is because he basically fell off a cliff when he turned 30. His last year with the Braves, he was bad. And then his 1 year with the Dodgers, he was remarkably, terribly bad. And then he kind of had a little bit of a bounce back, but his OPS plus through age 29 was 116, which gets him closer. But I think the same things that led to his offensive demise also led to his defensive. I don't think that he won some of his Gold Gloves based on reputation. And not like to the extent that Derek Jeter did. Derek Jeter was actually bad defensively in winning Gold Gloves. Andruw Jones was still good, but I don't know that he was a legitimate Gold Glove quality center fielder when he was winning some of those Gold Gloves. And so when you factor all that in, him falling off a cliff offensively and his defense really taking a hit later in his career, I understand people. I would still vote for Andruw Jones, even though he's one of my least favorite players of all time. I couldn't stand the guy before he came to the Dodgers and sucked. And so I don't like Andruw Jones, but for me, he's a Hall of Famer. But his case isn't nearly as clear cut as Scott Rolen's was.
yeah, he's an interesting one, like I said, just because literally age 30 is or his age 30 season was last time he won a Gold Glove. Then he went to the Dodgers. Then after that, he never really was quite the same, which is wild because he did finish with 434 career home runs. So if he had just been decent for like 5 years after age 30, he, might have been closer to 500 home runs. And then now you're having a real discussion of when he gets in rather of does he get in. But yeah, the other guy with Dodger ties, not, we talk about Gary Sheffield, but he got finished at 55%. The other one was Jeff Kent, who was in his last year. We'll talk about Jeff Kent after we talk about FanDuel, because today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And with the NFL playoffs here, we're excited for our new sports betting partner for Locked On, because FanDuel is the #1 sports book in America. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that makes betting on sports fun and easy. New customers, join today to get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/locked on. They have all your favorite bets from the money line to point spreads to player props, and you can combine them for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. Let's just say in the Eagles and Niners game, you believe that Christian McCaffrey and Jalen Hurts are going to score touchdowns. Well, you can put both of them and bet both of them to score touchdowns and increase the odds of no lower your odds, but increase the number you can win. So go check it out at FanDuel. It's all on the app. Go check it out. It's safe, secure, super easy to use, and don't miss out on the $5 turning into $150 of free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/locked on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook of the NFL. All right, let's talk about Jeff Kent. Like I mentioned, it was his last year on the ballot. He received 46.5% of the vote and didn't quite get that jump there with his 10th year. He could be considered for the Hall of Fame with the Contemporary Era Committee, I believe, in 2025. So he'll still have a chance to get in. Yeah, Jeff Kent seems like one. He was so good offensively, especially at second base. The position wasn't that great defensively and wasn't necessarily always the best person in terms of, to the media and everything else, which does count for some of this since they are the ones that vote. Whether you believe that should count or not is different. It doesn't matter too much because that's how it is right now. But yeah, Jeff, any surprise of Jeff Kent not getting a little bit more of a push in his last year?
It's a little bit of a surprise. He did make a pretty big jump, probably the biggest jump of his 10 years, but not nearly enough to get in. And yeah, I mean, the entire case for Jeff Kent in the Hall of Fame boils down to most home runs ever as a second baseman. And that's meaningful. But the fact is, he probably shouldn't have been a second baseman. He probably should have been a first baseman or a DH. And if he was a first baseman or a DH, those 377 homers and 123 OPS plus aren't nearly as impressive. Those are both right behind, Ryan Howard, 382 homers and 125 OPS plus. Ryan Howard got 2% of the vote on his one and only time on the ballot, and he dropped off. And so there's guys like that. But also around there, you've got Harold Baines and Tony Perez, who both are right in that same range as first baseman / DH types who made the Hall of Fame with the similar home run and OPS plus numbers, because they both eventually found a veterans committee with enough of their friends on it that they got voted in. And, it's also close to Gil Hodges' numbers, who it took Gil Hodges 50 years to get in, despite having the boost from being the manager of the 1969 Miracle Mets. And so for me, if you boil Kent's case down to most home runs as a second baseman, he shouldn't have been a second baseman, but he was. And so that, I think that's where the hard part of the discussion comes in. Do you give him credit for technically standing at second base during the games in which he hit a lot of home runs, even though he didn't do it very well? Or do you kind of put him on par with people who were roughly his defensive equals, who were mostly first baseman and DHs? And, you got a lot of Joe Adcock and Derek Lee and Richie Sexton and Kent Herbeck and those kind of guys who it's like, okay, yeah, not quite the same quality of player.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens with him in terms of the contemporary committee, but it'll be always be an interesting part with him just because of the fact that I guess it's not his fault he played second base. That's where they put him. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't know if we necessarily feel bad for him, but that's just the way it goes. All right, let's look ahead at next year's potential Hall of Fame eligible, or but they're already eligible unless they come out of retirement. A few names with some Dodger ties. Adrian Beltre will be the first time on the ballot. Adrian Gonzalez, first time on the ballot. And Chase Utley, first time on the ballot. You got some other names: Jose Bautista, Bartolo Colon, Matt Holliday, Victor Martinez, Joe Mauer. Not necessarily guys that have, or David Wright, not necessarily guys connected to the Dodgers. Maybe not even necessarily guys that are having a chance. But of the three, Beltre, Gonzalez, and Chase Utley, Jeff, are we going to see any Hall of Famers? If not next year, then just some point in their 10 years on the ballot.
I think Beltre is a first ballot Hall of Famer. I think he's likely to get in. I don't think he'll necessarily challenge the, Mariano Rivera's 100% vote, but I expect Beltre to be comfortably in the 80% range, 80 to 90% range next year, and get in pretty easily on his first ballot. Chase Utley is going to be the interesting one for me. Utley, to me, is clearly a Hall of Famer, but I think that's going to be a test of, a lot of he had fewer plate appearances than Scott Rolen did. He had a relatively short career, only 16 years, partly because he didn't debut until, he was 24 years old already when he debuted. He had some injuries over the years. He didn't play his first full season until his age 26 season. But those first 6 years when he was at the Phillies, 6 or 7 years, he was outstanding, very, very good, offensively and defensively. He also kind of got the short end of the stick by, Jimmy Rollins won an MVP, Ryan Howard won an MVP. Both of those years, they weren't even the best player in the Phillies infield, let alone the best player in the National League. Chase Utley was always better than those guys every single year, but because he did it, it wasn't as flashy. It was, base running value, ton of base running value, a ton of defensive value. He wasn't hitting the huge home run numbers. He tapped out at 33 homers, which is a lot, but not by 2008 standards. It was solid seasons, but he was a great base runner, great defender, just a great hitter. I mean, Chase Utley for me is an easy Hall of Famer.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see with him too because he doesn't necessarily have any. Like he's not like Jeff Canner or Barry Bonds, where that like media has issue with him in terms of him speaking to the media, but he does have a little bit of a villain role, mainly for the slide at second base when he took out. I don't even remember who it was anymore, but when he took out the guy on the
Ruben
Mets, and
Tejada.
yeah, and you can be on two sides of that coin of Chase Utley's a gamer and gave up his head in order to break up a double play, or you can see it the other side where Chase Utley's a dirty player. I don't know how much that'll factor into it. Other than that, I don't think there was really much like Chase Utley's dirty, rather than just Chase Utley plays the game hard. And for a lot of the people that vote for Hall of Fame, that would seem to be right up their alley. He has another similar case, not similar, but with like Andruw Jones, he was really good up until age around 30, 31. And then after that, he did have another all-star appearance, but he was just kind of good the rest of the way. But I think those last couple of years with the Dodgers won't really gain him anything in terms of value from the numbers he put up, but maybe it might gain him some value of seeing how Chase Utley kind of became a persona in a sense, or maybe this is just around the Dodger fans because we got to see it. I don't know how much that extended to beyond Los Angeles, but yeah, he probably won't, definitely not first ballot, but he'll for sure be up in the mix, and I would imagine eventually gets in. Yeah, Beltre for sure first ballot. He has another interesting career, but I think he has everything going positively for him. And then Adrian Gonzalez, I'll just be interested to see if he actually stays on the ballot. He was one of those guys who was very good and was very good for a few different teams and over a few different years. But it doesn't necessarily at first base. It's pretty hard to break in with some of the offensive numbers he had.
Yeah, for sure. Gonzalez was, kind of classic Hall of very good kind of player. I do have to quibble with one thing you said. Andruw Jones had 1.7 career WAR from age 31 to the end of his career. Chase Utley had 22.3. So, it kind of looks the same because Andruw Jones started at age 19 and Chase Utley started at 24. And so if you look at their baseball reference page, it's like, about 10 years of being really good. But Chase Utley's 10 years took him into his mid 30s and he had a more reasonable decline in his late 30s that you would expect from a guy. So really it's the early years of not getting his start until age 24 that kind of messes up with Utley's overall numbers.
Yeah, I was mainly looking at the baseball reference side of things. So yeah, definitely over WAR, it makes more sense. And he was valuable, just not as valuable in terms of like being an all-star and everything else.
Yeah, and even at the end of his career, he was in peak physical shape, still a great base runner, and that's a lot of the knock against Andruw Jones is some of it seems self-inflicted. He looked like you and me by the end of his career, and after being such an elite defender and elite athlete, it's kind of I think there's probably some bias towards blaming him for his own decline a little bit.
Speaking of peak physical form, your favorite player, Bartolo Colon, also be on the ballot next year. I don't think he gets in, but Jeff's not a fan of Bartolo Colon, and a lot of people are for different reasons, and those reasons are probably the reason that Jeff doesn't like it.
I have nothing against Bartolo Colon as a person. In fact, I think that what I don't like is the Bartolo Colon worship because I think it's all just making fun of him, and he, doesn't realize it, or he leans into it because it's his chance at being famous. But I think it's mostly. I don't think the fat jokes are as good natured as they seem, and they don't call him They don't call him Big Toad. They call him Big Sexy. And he's big, he's not sexy. And so it's all sarcastic. And, I don't like sarcastic compliments. Also, he wasn't nearly good enough to be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. All right, let's get into Max Muncy talk, Hall of Fame talk over. We've talked a lot around Max Muncy, but not necessarily directly about him. But before we do that, real quick, I want to thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen of the day. Check out Locked On MLB Prospects for your second listen of the day. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, so go check him out. He'll probably talk about some of these guys we've talked about in the last couple weeks or so. The Dodgers have a lot of guys that are very good prospects, so go check it out. Locked On MLB Prospects. All right, Jeff. So Max Muncy, like I said, we've talked a lot around him, and we know he's going to be in the starting lineup pretty much every day. But we haven't necessarily, said for sure where he's going to be. We can obviously assume it's going to be at second base or at third base, barring any injuries. But is it a matter, do you think we're going to see him move around? Do we think he's going to stay at one spot? Are other people's defensive gains in the offseason going to affect where he plays, or do you think he has, a spot already kind of guaranteed?
Yeah, it's going to be so interesting to see because I don't. I think a lot of it will come down to how do other guys do in the spring. Can Michael Busch hold down second base? If he can't, well, then they have an opening at second base, and Miguel Rojas can definitely fill some of that. But I don't think that the Dodgers want Miguel Rojas in the starting lineup every day. But can Max Muncy play second base without the shift? He had turned himself into a good, solid second baseman when there was the shift, but I don't know that he is a true second baseman without the shift. And so it seems like Muncy probably is going to have to bounce around a lot. And the one position you didn't mention was also DH, and for that matter, first base. I wonder. I just started two different sentences, so I'm going to finish one and I'll say the other one. That's how the English language works most of the time. At DH, JD Martinez is going to be their regular DH, but JD Martinez was much, much better against lefties than against righties last year. Muncy has always been kind of a sometimes even a reverse split kind of guy, doing better against lefties than righties. But if you've decided that Max Muncy's in the lineup every day, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see JD Martinez get some days off against righties. And I could see Max Muncy filling in the DH spot for some of those days. I could also, going back to my other sentence I started, I could see Freddie Freeman getting more time at DH this year, just because, it's not like Freeman had a huge fall off in the postseason last year. He was the one who actually had a extra base hit to break their 0 for 20 runners in scoring position streak. But the fact is, Freeman likes to play every day, but I don't know that it's the best thing for the Dodgers for Freeman to play first base every day when you have Max Muncy. Muncy, if you remember, in 2021 was the best defensive first baseman in baseball. And then the Dodgers signed Freddie Freeman, and reasonably they moved Muncy off of first base, but Muncy is a very good first baseman. And so I could see on days when there's a righty on the mound, either Muncy at DH or Freeman at DH and Muncy at first base, which does give you more options to keep Muncy's bat in the lineup.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about first base or DH. I kind of just, penciled in JD and Freddie, but that does make sense. They're both, JD's a little bit older, not that DH is that physically demanding, but he may need some days off. And also, like you said, against right-handed pitching, he may need some days off as well. And the Dodgers, yeah, it is going to depend because let's just say, if Michael Busch, or we'll go with Busch first. If Michael Busch can be a guy and makes the roster and someone they're excited about, and let's just say it's mostly against right-handed pitching, okay, well, now you can get Michael Busch and Max Muncy and Freddie Freeman all in the same lineup if that's the way you want to go about it. And on the flip side, if there's lefties on the mound and you want to take some other guys out and move some other people around, then, Max Muncy can play wherever. I kind of what we saw last year was him take over more of that third base role. That's partially because Gavin Lux was playing so well at second base and kind of took over that position. And then, partially because they were giving Justin Turner more days off and moving guys around. I don't necessarily love Max Muncy at third base, but, he's good enough to be there. And if he can hit, then, he's good enough to be there on an everyday basis. Second base is kind of the one where I think the Dodgers would probably hope that he doesn't play too much second base, because that means some combination of Vargas or Bush has been good enough defensively and offensively to hold down that spot, and then they can keep Muncy, more in an everyday role at the third base position. But yeah, there's going to be moving around, and just like pretty much every season, other than Freddie Freeman and Trey Turner last year, there's every Dodger guy is going to sit about 10 to 15 games, and they're going to move people around and get guys in different spots. And Max Muncy, luckily for the Dodgers, is that versatile guy that can move around. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I see him more as third base, but that's probably what the Dodgers hope as well.
Yeah, that's probably right. And I actually like Muncy at third base. I think he was better last year than a lot of people gave him credit for. Do you remember the first time we mentioned Max Muncy on our podcast? It was on our old show, the Scully Avenue podcast. And you remember he came up and he had him at third base, and he made a couple really nice plays in his first couple games with the Dodgers. And I remember I referred to him as a barrel-chested young man. And that's all I had to say about him, which is better than what we said about Chris Taylor when the Dodgers traded for him, which is something along the lines of, well, we'll never hear that name again. So at least I complimented Max Muncy's chest. But yeah, I think he's a solid third baseman. And I do think maybe a lot of his value is going to come from bouncing around.
Yeah, and the shift thing, a lot of people have been talking about it on the offensive side, and obviously he'll probably benefit from it, just at least against the Padres he's going to benefit from it, because the amount of times that it seems like he gets a base hit into short right field, and then Machado or someone's there to catch it, is definitely going to change. But it does change things defensively, and I don't know if we've mentioned it a lot and we've talked about it, but I don't know, to the extent of it's actually going to make a difference. And I saw a couple articles in the last few weeks of that kind of thing where, it talked about offensively how shift is going to help people out and not necessarily hurt people too much, but defensively it is going to help or hurt people depending on, guys and how well they do. But I think with the Dodgers, at the very least, they're still going to continue to move guys around, obviously within the parameters of the rules. And other than maybe the couple balls you can't get to normally because you're not playing in shallow right field, I think the Dodgers defense will still be good enough, especially with some of these guys. But it is interesting that they're doing this, going with guys that are kind of unproven, or we assume they're going to go with guys that are more unproven defensively and hoping that they work out. But, they can always just kind of default to Rojas, Lux, and Muncy in the infield and not have to worry about anything else.
Yeah, I the one thing I'm sure about banning the shift is that a year from now we're going to be talking about 3 or 4 different things that we unforeseen consequences of banning the shift that we hadn't thought of, and not just unforeseen. I think they're unforeseeable. I think whether it's hitters changing their approaches or I think it's going to be a lot different than what we've seen the last couple of years.
Yeah, one of the articles I did see, I want to say had Dodgers pitchers on like a downward trend in terms of being affected by it, just because the Dodgers shift so much and it's usually very successful. But for the most part, they're still going to be able to do most of the shifts that they've done, and not as extreme. Obviously, the guy's going to have to stop and cut off, at second base. But well, yeah, they're not going to be able to move 3 guys onto the right side. But I figure the Dodgers are going to be smart enough to where they'll still be pretty good defensively in terms of being where the balls are going to be hit.
Yeah, and like we talked about on this show a month or so ago, Tony Gonsolin actually had the second most outs from the shift of any pitcher in baseball last year. And so he's one that's going to be really interesting to watch. And you can't just assume that. I think he had 18 outs from the shift. You can't just assume all 18 of those are going to turn into hits, because they can still put guys in some places, but it is, yeah, guys like Gonsolin, it'll be interesting to see what happens with them because of the shift. And, but one of the things that we can't really foresee right now is how teams will adjust defensively, including who they put at second base and where they position them within the new rules.
Yeah. So I guess you probably know this because you're a rules guy. They can move. So like if Muncy was playing third and Vargas was playing second, but then a strong lefty came up, they could still switch Muncy and Vargas.
I don't think so. I'll have to look it up. But I feel like I remember there being some rule about that they can't switch guys positions, but I don't remember for sure. Make a note. We'll talk about that tomorrow.
You would think that that would, if we can think about it, then MLB thought about it, and that would kind of be part of it. But we'll see. All right, Jeff, you got anything else you want to add?
Nope, that's it for me.
All right, thank you all for listening. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen. Make sure to check out Locked On MLB Prospects for your second listen with Lindsey Crosby. He's going deep on the MLB Stars of tomorrow, wherever you find podcasts and on YouTube, which is also how you can find us if you search for Locked On Dodgers, which is what you can do to find us on Twitter and Instagram as well. Jeff is on Twitter at Snydog. I'm at Vince Samperio. DMs are open on all those accounts if you need to get a hold of us. You can also get a hold of us via email, lockedondodgers@gmail.com, or via voicemail text at 323-863-5625. We're here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be with us when you get in your car or if you're at home. Text Smart Device Play Podcast, Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. Have a good one.
We'll talk to you tomorrow.